Always true.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Founded in 1945, the United Nations struggles to keep up with the challenges of today's world. The UN has been criticized for being ineffective in the crises of Syria, Yemen and Myanmar, for example. It's also come under fire after many scandals, including allegations of sexual misconduct by peacekeepers. Its leadership promises change, but can its 193 member states come to a consensus on how to take the UN to the next level? A question we pose to María Fernanda Espinosa, President of the United Nations General Assembly. Thank you for being here and talking to Al Jazeera.
Very pleased to be here, Sami. Thank you.
You know, some ask the question, is the UN facing perhaps the greatest threat with the rise of nationalism in the West, in Europe, the current US administration's opposition to multilateralism? Where does it leave your organization and your job?
Well, I think that multilateralism is more needed than ever because we are facing so many global challenges, and the only response to global challenges is through global leadership and collective action.
But does it feel like fewer and fewer believe that today?
Well, I think that people are seeing, the fruits of multilateralism. We are seeing that we are delivering on the 2030 Agenda, Sustainable Development Goals, that we are making the change. We just adopted the Global Compact on Migration. We are about to adopt a Global Compact on Refugees. We came out of Poland with a rule book, with a program of work to implement the Paris Agreement. But there is no other way to tackle climate change, which is an existential threat to humanity.
It doesn't feel that way when you listen to the statements of people like Donald Trump, though. Does that undermine the United Nations?
Well, I think that the majority of member states are absolutely in favor of a strong multilateral system, of a rules-based international system, and a stronger role for the United Nations.
Maybe the majority, but when you have a big power like the US, does that, oppose to some aspects of multilateralism, if not all of it? Does that undermine the UN?
Well, what I would say is that, for example, let's take the issue of climate change that I just mentioned. What you see is that cities, hundreds of cities in the United States, individual states, they're taking very seriously the Paris Agreement, and they are getting together to deliver on the Paris Agreement, and that is a very positive sign, which means that, perhaps a government doesn't feel like they're ready to join an agreement or to be part of a process, and that's perfectly fine. I think one of the beauties of the multilateral system is that it also is prepared for dissent.
You're meeting in Doha for the Doha Forum, and many representatives of many countries are here, but yet the host country is suffering a Saudi-led boycott. Does that undermine the spirit of multilateralism and multilateral action?
Well, I would say that sometimes the capacity of regions to shape their own destiny, to come up with solutions, is the best approach. Always the United Nations, our system can broker, facilitate, enable dialogue, but at the same time, I'm a strong believer on regional responses. And I think
Would you call for an end to the boycott?
Well, what I would say is that it is very important that all the parties involved, they sit and they talk, because the only way to solve problems, difficulties, conflicts is through peaceful means, through dialogue. The transformative power of dialogue is what the United Nations stands for.
But a dialogue is difficult when you have a blockade and a boycott, right? So do you think that should end?
Well, dialogue is always difficult when you have, contentious situations. but dialogue is the only weapon, really, truly efficient weapon to end any kind of conflict and difference between two member states of the United Nations is that. And so the call would be to look, from a regional perspective, how to address the difficulties that Gulf countries are facing and how, they come together because they have more issues that unite them than issues that separate them.
Would you like to see, one way or another, this boycott end? Do you see it as President of the General Assembly? Is it more of a problem for you in organizing diplomatic action that you'd like to see end?
Well, I would say it doesn't really matter if it's a problem for me or not. What we would like to see is a more peaceful world where everybody has the same opportunities, where we are really firm in combating poverty and inequality, in providing equal opportunities to everybody, and that requires peaceful environments.
Okay.
And I think that this country, as every other country, they deserve to live in peace.
Talking about regional issues, what's your feeling on the calls for a UN investigation into the killing of Jamal Khashoggi?
Well, I think that I have been very outspoken on this issue. As soon as his death was confirmed, I called publicly for an urgent and independent investigation.
Should it be a UN independent investigation?
Well, the concerned parties should request the UN to act and to undertake an independent investigation, but there is a need from member states to request the Secretary General. In this case, it's our executive arm, which is the Secretary General and the Secretariat, that should take that on board. But it is very important.
You would like to see that call made, and you'd like to see that?
Well, what is important is that there is no impunity on this issue.
Do you think the Saudi investigation so far has been credible? Just your personal opinion. We're months after the killing, and they still haven't found the body.
Well, it's not up to me. I mean, my opinion in this really, it's not what is important. It's to have a thorough, independent, and urgent investigation on the issue.
But it might be important for viewers to know what you, as the President of the General Assembly, think about an investigation which doesn't even produce the body. Is that credible?
Well, what I'm saying, and my call has been, and I repeat again, for an urgent, independent, and thorough investigation on this case.
Have we seen that so far?
Well, I'm saying that if the UN is requested, it has to go through our Secretariat, and it has to be the decision of the Secretary.
Have we seen that in the Saudi investigation so far, an independent and thorough investigation?
Well, my opinion, I just mentioned it to you.
Do you believe the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman could not have been involved in this killing?
In my position as President of the General Assembly, my personal opinions on things are really not worthwhile. I do represent the 193 countries, and of course I stand for human rights, for protecting the rights of journalists on their duty, and I am really shocked in knowing that close to 50 journalists have been killed only this year. This is the information we have. This is unacceptable. Journalists they should be protected and live in safe environments to deliver on their work.
Clearly that wasn't the case with Mr. Jamal Khashoggi, though. He went into his own embassy and, by the admission of the authorities, ended up killed. That's a major, at the very least, to put it mildly, failure, is it not, to protect a journalist?
Well, yeah, I think that this really runs against what I was just saying, that we are, and the United Nations as an organization is in favor of the right to free press and safe working environments for journalists.
Do you believe the Trump administration can bring peace between Israelis and Palestinians? The world has been waiting for this new peace plan to be unveiled, and it's been repeatedly delayed. Do you think at the end something productive will come?
I am a strong believer on regional responses, and I think that the Palestinian issue is long due. We have passed I don't know how many resolutions, both in Security Council and the General Assembly. And the call I had made as President of the General Assembly is for the compliance of the agreements we have made on the Palestinian issue, which is the typical, and we all know, two-state solution.
I guess my question is, do you think this Trump administration, do you have any hope that they are the ones who are going to be able to finally bring peace?
I think that we should not rely on one party or one country alone. I am saying that it is very important that this is first taken up by the regional, the region as a whole, and really come up with something that would enable to have progress on the peace talks, which we haven't seen so far. And when we get organized and act on this issue, there are so many, hundreds of thousands of civilians that are suffering. And the humanitarian issue in Palestine, in the Gaza Strip, we know that is very, it's painful, and we need a collective response. But I don't think that we should just address one country. I think this is a larger issue.
The United States, of course, is the most powerful country when it comes to the Middle East peace process, right? There have been many regional attempts and initiatives. Nothing seems to work unless the Americans are fully committed. Would you not agree to that?
Well, they are yet another partner, very important partner, but I think that all the stars have to align in order to really find, a sustainable solution for the Palestinian people.
Talking about regional suffering, Yemen is another sore spot in the region. There's been some good news lately, though, but a question. How will, we've had the announcement of a truce in Hodeidah. Do you have any idea how the UN will oversee the withdrawal of combatants from the city of Hodeidah?
Well, I think that this very first step, which is the ceasefire in Hodeidah, is going to really, make the difference. And we are all worried about the humanitarian situation in Yemen. And this very fact will allow, all the goods and services to come, and really change, the very, painful situation of the Yemeni people there. So
but will the UN be sending troops? Are you aware of any countries which are ready to send any troops to facilitate?
This is not a decision that is made by the General Assembly. This is something that the Security Council should address.
But do you have any indication of it or hope of it?
I haven't heard about that. This is an issue that has to be dealt with in the Security Council, but I think that this has been a very important step forward. This ceasefire is going to really make the change to the Yemeni people that are suffering and that have been victims of one of the most terrible humanitarian crisis.
Talking about humanitarian crisis, of course, there's Syria too. We can't not mention that one. Do you really believe that the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad will accept a committee, half of which is made of opposition members, to write a new constitution for the country?
Well, I cannot predict, especially on.
But do you have confidence because the UN is working on this?
Well, what I'm saying is that it is very risky. I am not a person to predict anything.
Understood.
Yes, I follow the facts, and that's also my job and my responsibility as President of the General Assembly.
But since the UN is committed to working on this, do you believe that this might succeed?
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to the talks that are starting. Under the auspices of Russia, Iran, and Turkey for this constitutional committee to be formed. And that, I think, would send, positive signs for hopefully, a sustainable solution of the Syrian conflict.
What do you say to those who might say, though, isn't the real diplomacy being brokered by Russia, Turkey, and Iran in arranging a truce in Idlib rather than through the UN effort, because the UN effort doesn't have any teeth? How do you respond to that?
Well, absolutely not, because the initiatives by different countries to sit and to contribute to address an existing conflict is perfectly fine. And the umbrella of the United Nations as an enabler, as an honest broker, is always there, of course. And I don't think that the UN has failed at all.
So you don't think the UN has failed in its first and second charter mandate, international peace and security?
Well, the United Nations is made of the member states. The United Nations is not like a supra-creation no, it is made of member states. So when there are initiatives of member states, to really contribute, to peaceful solution of the Syrian conflict, it's more than welcome. And the United Nations have had, we have, made a difference in so many issues. And of course, we have failed on others, but because of there are failures, it doesn't mean that we do not have more achievements and more things to be, more issues to be proud of. If you look at
hundreds of thousands of civilians have died in some of these conflicts. That's a pretty big failure. I'm not blaming you personally for it, but I guess what I'm asking you is whether it's frustrating for you as President of the General Assembly to be beholden to the will of to your member states, while you carry a lot of responsibility. The world looks towards you to find solutions. But as you've said repeatedly in this interview, it's up to the will of the member states, or it's up to the Security Council. We know the Security Council is dominated by 5 world powers. Is it ever frustrating for you that you don't have your own ability to enforce your will as a General Assembly, right?
Well, I think that it is challenging. Sometimes it's very good that people understand the very complex structure of the United Nations. We have 3 main bodies of the United Nations: the Social and Economic Council, the Security Council, and the General Assembly. The General Assembly is the Parliament of Humanity, is where the 193 states are represented. We all sit in the same seats, we have the same microphone, we all vote. So it's the will and the decision of 193 states.
But President Maria,
and then we take decisions. We are the normative body of international law, and the big responsibility on peace and security issues relies very much on the Security Council. But the entire UN family, I think that if you ask every member state, do you want to live in a peaceful world or in a chaotic and violent world? They would say, we want to live in a, yes,
but
they would say that.
A parliament can call governments to account. A parliament can even sometimes bring governments down. You can't do that. You're a parliament, but without any power. Is that not frustrating?
Well, that's your opinion. That's not mine, and certainly not the opinion of 193 member states that put a lot of effort trying to do their best in the norm-setting process for international law. And sometimes we succeed, other times we're not able to deliver. It is true, however, that we need a stronger United Nations. We need a stronger General Assembly. We need to undertake this very profound structural reform process that we are undergoing.
But it's not a matter of opinion that General Assembly resolutions are not binding, right?
Well, General Assembly resolutions are part of the norm setting of international law.
But they're not binding. The Security Council has
we have accountability.
Routinely ignored the...
Well, we have accountability mechanisms. We have monitoring mechanisms. Countries, they are doing their best. If you look, for example, at implementation of Agenda 2030, so we should not forget that the United Nations has, in the charter that was drafted 73 years ago, has 3 pillars. One is the pillar on peace and security, which main responsibility relies on the Security Council. You have the development pillar and the sustainable development efforts of countries, and then you have the human rights pillar as well. We cannot think about a peaceful world without development, without sustainable development, without fighting poverty and inequality. And that's very much the work that the General Assembly does.
Do you ever feel let down by the Security Council?
Well, sometimes we are disappointed, but I think it is, it's true. We can always do better, of course.
You mentioned the UN's charter written over 70 years ago. Is it time for reform?
Well, there is an ongoing process to reform the Security
Council. It's been going
Council.
on a long time. Are the reform initiatives themselves outdated now?
Well, no, I think we shouldn't, get confused, because there is a reform process of the organization that is in progress. The implementation will start in January next year. It's a 3-pillar reform on the peace and security architecture, on a new development, a new architecture for the development system, and very strong management reforms.
Well, allow me to read to you some of the indicators on a global scale. The 2018 World Inequality Report, that talks about increased global wealth and income inequality. The 2018 Rule of Law Index, that talks about declining global standards of human rights. The very own UNHCR's Global Trend Study cites record forced global displacement in 2017. Does that not make you worry about whether the world is going in the wrong direction when it comes to development?
Of course, we have huge challenges. I don't think that we live in an ideal world, unfortunately.
Can it be turned around?
And I think that that's why we are for, just to tackle, to be responsible, and to deliver on these issues. I am also shocked for the multiple crises that we are facing nowadays. The climate crisis, the displaced persons, the human rights standards. But, what is that we can do about it? To have a stronger cooperation international system, to have a very strong international rules-based system that can respond to these challenges. And here I want to be very bold. One of the major challenges that we face is precisely, the eradication of poverty and inequality. If we are able to tackle that, affirmative action policies, to narrow the inequality gap, that is good for the other 2 pillars. It's good for human rights, it's good for peace and security, it's good for development.
I guess my question is, can you fix these problems when multilateralism itself is becoming a bit of a victim, listening to the statements of some of the rising forces from the right wing in Europe or from the administration currently in the White House in the US? You get the idea many powerful players in the world today, or some of them, are not on board with the idea of multilateralism. They want to head into what they call a nationalistic, sovereignty-based world.
Well, I think that that's a false dichotomy, to say it's either you go for
well, maybe false, but if they believe it, doesn't it undermine your job?
Yeah. The globalization here and the multilateral system and the UN, one side. Or, exercise your national sovereignty and decide for the good of your own people. It's either or. It's not an either or. And I think that we should be very bold about a strong narrative.
That may be the case. You may be right, but if powerful countries don't believe that, Madam President, isn't that a problem for you and for the UN?
I wouldn't see that it is a permanent issue.
You think it'll change?
We have ups and downs, of course. We need to prove ourselves that the only way to address global challenges is through collective action. No matter if you're a big country, a powerful country, or a very small country, but if we do not act together on the climate challenge, if we do not act together on the terrorism issue, the go it alone formula does not work. And this is not because I believe in it. Is there a way to address and tackle terrorism one country alone? Impossible. Is there a way to address and tackle the issue of massive migration?
Or climate change.
Or climate change. But, no, because it's either you cooperate and you have a dialogue between the countries of origin, of transit and destination, or you cannot address the issue of migration, no matter how strong your laws are, or no.
Talking about migration, there was some good news in December, 160 countries signing the Global Compact on Migration. That is a non-binding agreement, though.
It is true, it's a non-binding framework, but it is an enabler to foster cooperation, exchange of good practices, to foster dialogue on international migration.
So what practical difference do you think it'll make? Can you tell our viewers that this compact will make to the people involved in very risky, deadly migration patterns?
Well, more than 250 million people are people on the move, or migrants. around the world. And we need to deliver for them to ensure that their fundamental rights are guaranteed. The compact
you think it will be now?
I think the compact is going to help a great deal. The compact has 23 policy recommendations for countries, and they will decide how they adopt them and how they translate them into their national policy. They have to look if it's okay under their own constitutional framework. So the compact doesn't harm, on the contrary, national sovereignty. It's on the contrary. It helps countries to establish cooperation mechanisms with partners and neighbors. But what I'm saying here is that these millions of migrants, they do need, a shared framework to guarantee their rights. And the compact speaks very strongly against one of the worst phenomena that is happening nowadays, which is trafficking and smuggling of people. And from the smuggling and trafficking of human trafficking, 70% are women and girls. So I think that the world has to stand up and stop that.
María Fernanda Espinosa, United Nations General Assembly President. Thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you. Thank you very much.